What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? In primary school we had a WWI memorial lesson and we were asked if anyone had any relatives who fought at the time. My friend brought in a picture of his great-great-grandfather with his wife. A girl also brought in a picture of her great-great-grandfather with his wife. The teacher said they looked similar. She put them side by side and looked shocked. We gathered around, and it was the same man who had kept his 2 wives a secret. Both had been married privately. They were cousins and didn't know. I have a co-worker Joe, great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that her child-free life was okay with them. So, she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much, but as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to a point that they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves, something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new, off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought the car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu she just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous, just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare of being pregnant. Multiple doctors said it's just not going to happen for me. No way." But her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was actually wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick and, you guessed it, pregnant. So, in their 40s, and with 12 years of living just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited, even though they had to sell the sports car, since a two-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way, happy healthy baby. So, they became a family of 3, and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school, great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's gonna throw at you. I work at a prison and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English, but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We call a supervisor, and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and come back in with her husband, who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario and he asks, "Well, where did he go?" He doesn't have any friends or family in the US. We told him we don't know where he went. He was released, he could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says, "Well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs." So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is running scooting around the US and no one knows where he is. Told this before in another thread, but it's still hilarious to me. Guy I knew in high school English class was talking one winter day about how he was late to school because someone hit his mailbox. His folks made him fix it up before he went to school. He missed his ride and had to walk instead, but the school staff was cool about it and didn't punish him. A few minutes later, another girl comes into class and she's talking about how her morning sucked. She lost control going down a hill and hit someone's mailbox. She freaked out and drove off before anyone witnessed it and described a few details of the house. Mailbox guy puts 2 and 2 together and blurts out, "You hit my mailbox." He wasn't super mad about it and she turned beet red. It was hilarious at the time the way they both reacted. We are living in Florida at the time and my dad goes to the eye doctor because he is seeing double. In all other respects he's healthy. He explains his symptoms to the doctor. This was the early 2000s. The doctor picks up a medical book on eye problems. He finds the kind symptoms my dad is describing. The doctor shows him the book. In the book there is a whole medical page explaining what he is experiencing and a picture of a kid from the 1960s. My dad looks at the picture and says, "Doc, that's me." The doctor says, "Yes, those are the symptoms you are showing." My dad says, "No, really, that's me in the picture." It turns out my dad had this eye problem when he was a kid, and it was so rare that they took his picture in 1960's Ohio and he slapped him in a book of rare eye problems. He doesn't remember much about taking the picture, but he did manage to get a copy of it to take home. Was on a flight from Paris to Boston. I had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point a man from a few rows up goes into a bathroom, and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out looking up towards where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping, and once she comes back to him, they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They are in there for quite a while, and then he comes out and goes back to his seat, and a few minutes later she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats, and about an hour later repeat it. The man goes in and then she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane and the woman is standing at the gate waiting, and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her and gives her a kiss on the lips and asks her if she was able to get any sleep on the flight and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Little town I grew up in had these 2 car dealerships on opposite sides of town. One Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, shit talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father, as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dockworker who comes home expecting dinner to be in the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later. We are all gathered for his funeral. We are a big but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up, about the same age as my dad and his siblings, who nobody knows. Long story short, turns out it was my grandfather's son. From another family. From another marriage. That went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just the one with this other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. The one guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his GF. Yeah, she's pretty big, but she's amazing. She's the one for me. I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so forth, and I gave him encouraging words and how his life was going to change so much, we bonded a bit. His baby was going to be born right before Christmas. He missed our work Christmas party because his baby was being born. We expect him to be gone for paternity leave, but he shows up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up she was fat for no reason must have meant she was so fat you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds. They talked about what they would name their baby, how they'd handle taking care of it, all that sh*t. I don't know what she thought was gonna happen when 9 months passed and no baby. I guess it's good she came clean though. A more diabolical person would have faked a miscarriage or something. But that was seriously messed up. Shortly after the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. When I was a sophomore in high school, we had a rash of thefts occurring during classes. It was a small school, and we had no hall monitor or cameras in the halls. It went on for months, until the gym teacher happened to catch the kid in the act of stealing from someone's backpack. There was a ruckus out in the halls and my class ran out to see what was going on. The thief was the principal's son. The gym teacher was holding him by his wrist and was telling everyone he just caught him stealing. The kid then pretended to pass out and he just fell to the floor while everyone rolled their eyes and went back to class. He was known for trying to get attention however he could. So cringy. I went to college in Milwaukee, but I took some initial credits at a 2-year campus in Waukesha, a suburb just outside the city to save money. The University of Wisconsin has a series of 2-year campuses across the state. They did some classes remotely including German. The professor was on my campus, however, so he did one in-person session and then another section for the remote students at the other campuses all over the state. Anyway, we took a field trip one day to a really good old world authentic German restaurant to try some different foods. It was great. He invited all the remote students to come down, but didn't expect anyone to make the trip. The day we went the prof told us one person was coming down from Warsaw, almost 3 hours to the north, and also my hometown. Some of my classmates knew I was from up there and have this perception of it being this small up north town. It kinda is, but the whole metro area is probably around 100,000. Small but not true small town living. I explained to them that Warsaw isn't that small and I don't know everyone there. It's not like that. Sure enough, this guy shows up. We look at each other for a moment and he asks, "Hey, aren't you married to insert my wife's name here?" Good damn it. Note, yes, I was married in college. I was still in my 20s. I was a non-trad. We got married when my wife finished college and then she supported us while I went back to finish my degree. She's a ducking saint. One of my childhood friends, 1950s, had a mom that was weird. We lived in a rural area. She was always quiet, studious, bespectacled, and so even-tempered it was like she was on Prozac. But always impressed you with her intellect when she did converse. She wore typical plain print dresses common for housewives at the time, and a hairdo that belonged in the 1930s. A strange mix of high intelligence and old-fashioned ways. The weirdest thing about her was that she would disappear for days at a time without any explanation, and my friends seemed to take it in stride. The 4 brothers just took care of each other and their older dad who was sickly. 50 years later, my childhood friend and I find each other on the internet. In one of our earlier online conversations, he divulges, "By the way, my mom was an FBI agent all those years." Not even I nor my brothers had any idea. A 50-year-old puzzle suddenly all fit together. It even probably explains why she faithfully attended our country church which had a rabid, crusading communist on the church board. We were just fresh out of the McCarthyism era. A recent transplant from LA to our backwoods little community. He was always trying to recruit the young people through long Marxist-oriented discussions on our campouts and hiking trips. One day, he just disappeared. Shortly after, my friend's family moved to the big city. Mission accomplished, is my best guess. And old-fashioned? The woman had to be trained in firearms and self-defense. Glad I was always on her good side. I thought. Me and my cousin used to go to the gym together. He got some protein shake powder for his birthday. One tasted like blueberry, the other one was flavorless. After workout, we usually came home and prepared the shakes, sometimes with water, usually with milk, and sometimes we would drink the plain ones, sometimes with flavor. After some time, we noticed that the plain powder's packaging has a strawberry on it and that it says strawberry flavor. We thought it was a factory mistake or something. The year came around and my cousin had birthday again, invited the same friends that brought him the proteins a year before. He shows the packaging and says that the present from the year before had a factory error. They lolled like crazy. Turns out that they pranked him by putting flour into an empty protein powder container and we drank 3 kilos of flour and milk/water in the past year. They wanted to tell him after, but got too drunk and forgot about it. This will probably be super cliche, but my grandma had some rough days in a hospital bed. We were fearing for the worst, and all the family were taking turns to keep her company. This was way before cell phone existed, so communication wasn't as easy as today. So, my dad got a call one of those days, and it was my aunt that was with her. Of course I don't know exactly what she said, but my dad understood that she was dead. We rushed over there basically as soon as he hung up because he wanted us to say goodbye. During the whole car trip, my dad was bawling his heart out. We arrived to the hospital. We were of course super sad. We already knew in which room she was, so we went directly there, ready to say goodbye, except she wasn't dead at all. She was sitting in her bed eating soup with a nurse, like any other day. I was like 7-year-old at the time and I really freaked out, but was extremely happy about the whole situation. We talked with her for some minutes and my dad couldn't stop crying and hugging her. My aunt wasn't in the room, but she arrived a little later, and my mom was incredibly mad at her for the false alarm. My aunt insisted several times that she never said that our grandma was dead. However, in the next half hour or so, the rest of our family arrived to the hospital too because everybody received a similar call from my aunt, and everybody had the same idea that grandma was dead. I don't remember the exact details, but as far as I recall, the thing was that my grandma had some sort of minor stroke and her heart stopped for a few seconds, but somehow, my aunt blew the thing off proportions on the phone calls. We ended up basically having a party on her room that day because all of us were together, which was a very rare scenario in my extended family, and I felt that the sadness we felt before arriving to the hospital made us appreciate more the happiness, and I think that somehow that impromptu family party helped my grandma recover, and she managed to live for a few more years after that. Like and subscribe for more content.